Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Social Europe videocast. My name is Robin Wilson, and this discussion today is part of a project on the challenges facing social democracy in the coming decade, which is being supported by the Foundation for European Progressive Studies and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And I'm privileged today to have as my guest Isabel Estrada Carvalhais. She is not only a member of Parliament, the European Parliament from Portugal, but is also a professor of political science and international relations at the University of Minho. You're very welcome, Isabel. Thanks for agreeing to do this. You are unusual.
Thank you.
You are unusual in being not only a practicing politician, but also a theorizing one, so to speak, with your academic expertise. So let me ask you first to stand back and put in a European perspective for our listeners the achievement of the Socialist Party in securing 41% in the election in January, allowing Antonio Costa to return to power with an absolute majority. If anything, the party has gained in support since the revolution of April 1974, whereas in Europe, those social democratic parties which have been in decline in recent decades can only look on in envy. Another Portuguese political scientist, Pedro Magalhães, argued in Social Europe that this was partly a product of social inertia, the Portuguese social structure, and so the sociology of support for the Socialist Party, he suggested, had changed relatively little over the decades. But what is your explanation for this electoral success story for social democracy in the European context, Isabel?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Robin, for this invitation, for joining Social Europe. It's really a pleasure, and I hope you can hear me and see me in good conditions. Sometimes, technologies are a big help. Other times, they tend to make things more difficult. Well, I would say that I agree partially with Pedro Magalhães' analysis. And I'm glad he said also partially regarding the explanation, the sociological explanation he presented, because it does not explain everything. And quite frankly, I'm very skeptical about sometimes some paternalistic approaches, assessments that we make of our electorate. I think, in certain regards, his analysis is correct, but we cannot forget something that I think is very important. When the Socialist Party came to government in 2015, we were, still in the middle of a crisis. We had been in an international bailout process. We had been, struggling with a very, very serious crisis. And the thing is, we had unemployment rates, I remember, of something like 17%, which was really a record. And when the socialist government of Antonio Costa in the first mandate, when he finished the mandate in 2019, the unemployment rate had dropped to 6.6%, something like this, and we can check, the percentage correctly. So this means that you could actually find public policies with strong social dimension being implemented. I'm not saying, and I should really mention this because I would not like people to think that, oh yeah, she's saying this because she's a socialist. This is important that we keep some objectivity, and as an academic, as an independent, because I'm not a militant of the party, I think this is important to say and to underline that we have to look at figures. We have to look at what was the real situation of the country when the socialist government arrived and when they left in 2019 and when they returned. So there have been there has been a series of very important social answers to the situation that many people, young people, elderly people were facing. And even now, as we look to 2020, what we saw in the middle of this COVID crisis, with all the problems that you can mention, because nothing is perfect and we are a country with limited resources, what we could see were actually a capacity to deal with a crisis. And so there was, I think, different people will have different visions and answers. But for me, the capacity of providing some social answers, especially to small companies, medium companies, enterprises, that were struggling with a crisis, and also to families that were struggling with unemployment, with the disruption of their daily life. This was very important. So I will not say that this answers everything, but it's important to think that when people, make their choice and vote, they also have this kind of reality in the back of their mind. They didn't see the need, I suppose, of changing, of choosing a different government. Because you had some kind of good answers, especially at the social level, that were relevant at that stage. And now we could also go on and also try to see why people don't see great alternatives at the center right at the moment. And this has to do not with the Socialist Party. It has to do also with the, with the stage, with the quality. And I would not like to go into that, but I think it's an issue, and an interesting one, which is to evaluate, to assess the real capacity of political dialogue that center-right parties have at this stage with population, with our constituents. So if you sum up all these things, the positive capacity that the social government had to deal with the COVID-19, to deal with the previous crisis, and then if you add also other difficulties in the way that right center parties have nowadays in communicating whatever they are their plans for the future of the country, then you will have also the reasons why people have chosen to vote in the Socialist Party and not for other parties. I know this is just a partial vision and a very partial and a very limited answer, because there is also this structural problem that we have of absenteeism, of people not voting in national elections and so forth. So it's much complex, I know, but in a very nutshell, I think these are also relevant aspects that we have to consider to explain the success of these new elections in the beginning of this year.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm now going to turn to your experience in the European Parliament as a member of the Agricultural and Fisheries Committees. You contributed to debates and reports in the Parliament on pesticides, organic agriculture, biodiversity, animal welfare, and the so-called blue economy when it comes to fishing. And of course, agriculture and fisheries still remain a significant source of livelihoods in Portugal too. But Social Democrats have largely ceded political dominance in those parts of Europe dependent on agriculture and fisheries to conservatives, to the centre-right, or even the populists, relying on support concentrated in urban agglomerations. How do you think, with so many issues of biodiversity loss, pollution, and so on coming to the fore, that Social Democrats can go on the front foot with the progressive agenda for the rural world?
Well, that's really a very good question. First of all, I should say that I'm very concerned with what we could call this, geography of abandonment, all this rural world that feels put aside, that feels alienated from the political decision process. And unfortunately, our mainstream parties, center-right and center-left parties, have been responsible for that in European terms. This is something we have to acknowledge, we have to accept, and we have to fight against. So there is no excuse. And this is important. It's the first point, and I'm very worried about this. And one thing I'm also worried about is that unfortunately, these more conservative parties and populist parties, also and far-right parties, they have been able somehow to instrumentalize, to take advantage of these populations and to spread this idea that, for instance, socialist parties in Europe and social democracy in general is against farmers, is against the rural world, is against the fishermen, which is not so. It's the opposite. And they have been, selling out these myth. It's a dangerous myth that if you want to defend farmers, if you want to fight for farmers and for their interests, then you have to split their interests from environmental dimension. One thing that I think we have to be better in communicating to people is that when we defend, when we argue for, when we fight for the environmental dimension, this is also thinking about people, thinking about our farmers, because nature is the very basis of their work. They need nature, they need good soils, they need water, they need good forests. So I think we haven't been able to communicate this, and we are somehow still inefficient. And I'm saying this very, with no problems at all. I think we are still very inefficient in communicating that we do want to conciliate the social and economic dimension with the environmental dimension, because I think it's so dangerous and it's so wrong to sell out to people the idea that you don't need to put environment in the equation. You have to put environment in the equation. There is really a loss of biodiversity. This is not an ideological issue. That's what I keep saying all the time when I go out to schools and to other, places. This is not about left or right. It's not an ideological issue. It's a scientific evidence. We're losing the quality of life of our oceans. We're losing biodiversity. We're running out the quality of our soils. We have to face climate changes. It's not even a question of fighting and winning the climate changes. We just talk about mitigating the impact of climate changes, because we have reached such a level of destruction that it's what we can say at this moment. So it's important that we take this message to people, but also, and I think it's important also to tell them that, this has to do with resources. I mean, the way they can do this transition into more friendly, ecologically friendly practices in agriculture, for instance, is by helping them with counseling. I mean, they need support. They need technical support for this, and they need money. And that's something that sometimes it's also, I would say, difficult for some more radical friends in the socialist areas to understand. They have a very green agenda, which I completely understand why, but at the same time they have to realize that we're talking about populations with very low social and economic capacity to answer to this environmental urgency, and we need to help them. For instance, in my country, we're talking about people that are usually around 65. The average age of farmers is 65. And so we were talking about older people, less educated, with less schooling, with more difficulties. We have to help them, and we cannot disbelieve. it's something that I also see in the conservative parties, is that they take advantage of this fact and they say that we don't care about these older people, we're just waiting for them to die. And one thing that we really have, one way to show that no, we want everyone to be included in this transition process, is to help out these people. And we have been doing our best in the parliament, struggling for a better CAP. I know it's not perfect, but we did this struggle to include smaller farmers and so forth, because it's important that our farmers understand and our rural world understand that we're not against them. But we do have to be more efficient in how we communicate this to people. And the best way to communicate this is also to show the possibilities that they have in terms of financing, in terms of financial support that they can get to make this transition. Otherwise, of course, people will not see, they will think that we are leaving them behind. That is not the purpose. It's absolutely against, I would say, the main principle of existence of socialist parties is we never want to leave people behind, especially those who are in the margins, those who are, less empowered. And this is very much about empowering people. And conservatives and populists and far-right parties, what they're giving is this illusion of empowerment, but they are not offering anything. There's just vocalizing, giving expression to this discontentment. And so it's easier, it's a very easy ground, because people feel discontent and they say, wow, these guys, they say what I want, what I would like to say. So they are really giving a voice to my discontentment, but they are not giving answers. And we are in the position of providing answers, of providing measures and strong public policies to help out these people. So I think this is really a responsibility, a big responsibility that we have to make sure that we don't lose our rural world. It does not belong to the past. Actually, it's the geography of the future if we think about the recovery of nature, for instance. So we really need vitality in our rural world. And in the European Parliament, for instance, now I'm with this file. I'm the rapporteur for the file on the long-term vision for rural areas. And I keep struggling a lot with these messages that it's important we do really empower and look seriously to the rural world, not just rhetorically, but really give it power of answer and action, of course.
Let me come back, Isabel, to the government in Lisbon that was formed after the election earlier in the year. That government has 18 ministers, of whom 9 are women and 9 are men. In Spain next door, the socialist-led government now has 14 female ministers out of 23. Apart from making it easier to highlight issues such as the gender pay gap and unshared and unsocialized care, what difference does it make, in your view, to how progressives govern if the progressives doing the governing have at least an equal presence of women around the cabinet table?
Well, I think it's really important, first of all, because it's a strong political message. I mean, we want to increase gender equality in our society. And one of the ways to do it is those who are running, those who are governing, do the example. So I think this is really very important. I know that Portugal has done a long way, and we still have a long way to do. At this moment, we are somehow, in the middle of the ranking, I would say, of gender equality in Europe. In comparison with the 27 countries, we are somehow the 15th place. So we have been, steadily and gradually increasing our gender equality, which is good. We still have issues to solve. For instance, one of the reasons why we still have a long way to do has to do with domestic violence. But at the same time, so acknowledging that we still have a long way to make sure we can talk about gender equality as as an achievement in our country, even though there are very important steps that we have been doing over the years. And for instance, I find quite interesting to look at figures in 2017 regarding cooperative leadership. We only had 17% of presence of female presence, and in 2021 it already increased to 28%. So step by step, these things are changing and mentalities are changing. One aspect that still says a lot about the progress that we still need to do has to do with distribution of time. When you look to the distribution of time especially for domestic activities between women and men, we are still very low in comparison with other European countries. So just to give you an idea, it's something like 77 or 78% of women are in charge of taking care of their children. So we still need a lot of progress in terms of, and this has to do with mentality. This has to do with changing attitudes in society. But whatever we can do in a top-down approach to make sure that the structure has to change, the structure of opportunities has to change, so it has to be a top-down decision, so that in the future you can see more bottom-up improvements. So these changes of mentality, of attitudes, of behavior, they will progressively be more evident in the future, I believe. And so it is important that those who are running, those who are governing, give the example. And for instance, the fact that we have around 40% of women in the National Assembly, in the Assembleia da República, the national parliament, is also a positive aspect. I know this is very controversial, and some people think that quotas for women are not enough. Others think that they shouldn't even exist. But I see them as a positive aspect, because I mean, if you have to create these sort of artificialities in the beginning, these sort of mechanisms, it's the better word, in the beginning of a journey to make sure that women are more present in political life, in leadership, in companies and so forth, then let's do it. And in the future, most likely it will not be necessary. But as a starting point, as a leverage point, I think it's really important. And especially because parliaments, national, local parliaments, they also have to express the diversity, intersectoriality of life, of society. So I would say it's not just about a gender issue in Parliament. We also have to think about other dimensions of diversity that should be present in the Parliament, and perhaps it will also happen in the future. So yeah, I see as very positive this balance of women and men, and it's important that people realize that these women are also, and first of all, very competent women. They're not there because sometimes people because they're women. They're not there. They're not in these positions as ministers and secretaries of state, or as or as deputies in the National Assembly, because a national parliament, because they're women. No, because they're also very smart, very intelligent, very very competent women. And it's amazing that somehow I still need to say this, because we never feel the need to say this about men. So this also shows how much work we still have to do. And other things that I find relevant in a top-down approach is that, yes, as governments, as politicians, we can do some change in people's lives, starting with, for instance, we have this in Portugal, this Pact of Conciliation, which is this attempt of conciliating family life, professional life, and personal life. And it's quite interesting to see the receptivity in society of companies, of institutions, and so forth, to this idea of conciliation of these three dimensions of life. It's really, really important. And so I see very positively what has been happening in the European Parliament in this regard. And I was very happy because we already had this approach before it appeared in the European Parliament. And we had realized the importance of having measures, political measures, that will incentivize the conciliation of these three dimensions of life in our companies, in our schools, in all spaces of labor where we find women.
Well, you did mention other axes of diversity, and my final question was about an issue which has been a big one for Social Democrats in recent decades, and that is managing cultural diversity in a more individualized and globalized world. Antonio Costa is, of course, himself partly a product of Portugal's Indian imperial connection, and when he became mayor of Lisbon, he moved his office into Moreira, the area of the city where formerly those who were known as the Moors were confined. In 2007, under the then socialist government, Portugal developed one of the first integration plans in Europe. And under the current plan, the Secretary of State for Integration and Migration coordinates the work of ministries, public institutions, civil society organizations, and local authorities in this arena. There are 19 municipal plans for migrant integration. There are also local plans for Roma integration. There are 106 local centres to support migrants and 3 national one-stop shops. At arm's length from government is the Office of the High Commissioner for Migration, which provides a repository of impartial expertise. So this is a very elaborate model that has been developed in Portugal to manage cultural diversity. And I wonder what you think, whether you think this is something that Social Democrats elsewhere in Europe should learn from, or does the recent rise of the far-right Chega in Portugal tarnish this success story in your view?
Well, another very good question, and a very one that would deserve a longer answer. First of all, I think we all can learn from each other. So it's not that Portugal can give lessons or receive lessons. We can learn from each other. And it's very interesting because if you look, this opportunity structure is very institutionalized. It's mostly it's a more a top-down approach, but it works. So I think it's a very interesting case because you could have more organic, more bottom-up answers. It's not that they don't exist, but it's interesting to see this sort of umbrella and to see that it has been helpful in the way society also associates and expresses itself. I find it very relevant and a very good case study in that regard. And I'm very proud as a Portuguese, and I know this is complex, because I'm not saying that we don't have issues to solve and to deal with. Well, there is, a long, a complex list of post-colonialist issues that we could talk about. But at the same time, I'm proud that a country like ours, with a big diaspora, with an emigration tradition for, not decades, for centuries, it manages in a relatively small period of time to create an immigration profile with relatively good results in terms of institutional answers, of governmental answers. And I think it was one of the reasons why over the years we have been ranking high in the MIPEX index, for instance.
This is the,
since 2000.
Sorry
the MIPEX.
It's the MIPEX index is the index of performance according to various indicators of migrant integration.
Exactly. Thank you. And of course, that's why I say, I mean, people could say, yeah, but it only looks at, it looks at legal stuff, political measures and so forth. But actually, it goes further than that. And when you look at it, you see that has been improvement in terms of political integration, of social integration, labor integration, and labor, it's really important. Of course, we still need some way in terms of access to healthcare, which is has been improving, but it's still something we have to work more deeply. But it's important. I mean, we look at it and we see that only a country like Sweden usually stays in the first, and we stay in the second place. So we are in the top 10. This must say something about the success of our delivery model that we have created. When I say delivery in the sense of capacity of helping our immigrant communities to integrate economically and socially and politically. As I was saying, this, of course, this does not mean that I'm, disregarding the existence of problems that we still have to work, because the structure does not solve all the problems of the agency. And for instance, we have these anti-racism laws since 1999, as I remember well. But the fact that you have a law doesn't mean that you don't find discrimination and racism on a daily basis on several circumstances. So this has to do with structural forms of racism and so forth that still have to be fought. They have to be, first of all, identified, because sometimes I think people, they are not even aware that they are having a biased approach to racial issues. They're not even aware. And somehow it became a sort of a taboo in the country, because we are all very much, even myself and older people and even younger people, we are still very much the ones that have this legacy about the Lusotropicalist ideology of the Estado Novo, of the dictatorship called the New State. This Lusotropicalist approach basically conveyed this idea that we were not racist, we were not a racist people, because somehow we were able to have this, intercultural approach with people from different parts of the world and different ethnic backgrounds and so forth. And my parents, my grandparents, myself, we are all, the result of this legacy. It gets ingrained, and it's very difficult to to contradict this. It's difficult for many people to accept that, yes, we do have racism, and we do have to work out without panic, without drama. We have to work this in schools, for instance, since early age. That's why I find the intercultural experiences not intercultural in the sense of, in that bad sense of integrating the other, of this paternalistic approach, but in the sense of learning with each other. I find it so important since the early stages of our life, when we are children and when we are, less, we still have our eyes clear from these veils, from these biased veils that come afterwards. And I don't think that all this that we have achieved over this, I would say since 1996, when we first created the High Commissioner for Migration and Intercultural Dialogue during Antonio Guterres, and all this evolution over the years, I don't think that anything of this is lost or is at stake or in crisis. No, it has been, developing, progressing over the years, and we are in the good direction, I think. For some reason, these last years of crisis, I think they affected, for instance, the capacity to give more attention to political integration of our immigrants and ethnic minorities. Because somehow this was in the political agenda a few years ago when I did my PhD, for instance, but somehow it lost its impact. It was no longer in the political agenda as a priority because there were so many other issues, social economic issues. But we also know that this is also up to the agents, that is to the associations, to immigrant associations, to ourselves as academics, also to push forward and to say, no, this has to be in the agenda. Come on. I mean, if you're waiting for the best time, if you're waiting for the solution of all social problems, all economic problems, it will be very difficult that this will ever be a priority. So we also have to create the political momentum. We know that. About the Chega, I don't see that Chega is a sort of a symptom that things are changing in the country in terms of this with all the problems, of course, but of this positive approach that our population has to immigrants. Saying in different words, we know that we have racist problems, xenophobic problems. It's okay, so I will not deny it. But in general terms, our population does not have an issue with immigrants. Maybe there are lots of explanations for this. Maybe because they haven't been in big numbers in Portugal, so people never saw them as really a threat to their jobs or something. I've written about this, so it would take a longer answer. I know I'm oversimplifying, but yes, there are reasons why people don't see them as a menace. The appearance of the emergence of Chega does not translate in my understanding a sort of a change in people's perception about immigrants. Racist people, xenophobic people, with homophobic people, they've always existed in our society. The only thing was that they didn't have a political expression in an organized party. So they were diluted in other right and center-right parties. And even in other parties, I suppose. I mean, so they have been there. They have been there. They're not significant. But they significant in numbers, but they have been there. So I think that we have to learn to live with this reality. It's also like looking at the mirror and saying, well, yeah, we have to recognize we are also this. We also have these people, and they are also, part of who we are. Of course, you can say, yeah, many of the people that vote in Chega are people who are discontent. Those, I agree that we can do a lot of work to recover, let's say, to recover to these people. Because if their vote is a protest voting, then if their life improves socially, economically, they will do different choices. I mean, it's not that they vote in the Socialist Party, but they can vote in other parties. There will be no reason why they should vote in this far-right party. But even if you recover, if we put things like in 10,000, even if you recover 8,000 people or 9,000 people, there will always be this 1,000 or 100, doesn't matter, that will stay and will stick with the party, not because they have social and economic issues. And many of these people have no economic issue at all. But because this is the way they look at the society, they have this conservative approach. They are even mad with Pope Francis because they think they are, too open, that he is too open to homosexuality issues. So they don't want to listen about this. And they think that, we're losing identity because we have the presence of too many ethnic minorities. This has to do with your mundo visão, with the way you look at the world. It has to do with other ideological aspects. So we have to realize that these people most likely will go on existing. So I don't think that we cannot disregard this kind of phenomena, this kind of parties. Of course, we have to respect this, but we can't be, taking too much time looking at them, because if we do that, we're giving, of course, what they want, which is, great public visibility, and we're losing the opportunity of giving attention to those people, with low salaries, minimum salaries, sometimes unemployed, who are still voting in the Socialist Party. And these people, wow, they need full respect and full attention. And when I went to the campaign, and for me this was a first experience in life because I was not a politician, so it was amazing, the quantity of all the people that you find in the streets. And they reach out and they say, hey, my retirement payment, it's low, but it's okay. I understand that the country hasn't much money, but one thing I will never do is to vote for, extreme far-right parties. Because they have an experience and a legacy that comes from the past. The problem is that these younger generations, they don't have this experience of dictatorship and so forth. And of course, these parties, these far-right parties, they have, they work out very well this relationship with the past because they know how to make the references. So they are never fascist. No, they never admit it. And even the way they talk about the period of the dictatorship, sometimes they say wonderful and positive things, but if you ask them very directly, they will say, no, we are not in favor of dictators and so forth. So they have these communication strategies that for younger people makes more difficult for them to understand what is really at stake. I think it happens in Portugal, it happens in Spain, it happens in France with the Rassemblement National, for instance. The way your capacity of changing the speech and diluting whatever you're fighting for, and to make sure that people will see you as a possibility. Why not? And the capacity of making people believe that you're not actually attached to those values of the fascist period. It's amazing. It's something that we know. We study this. We know it's complex. And in the case of this party, what I think, we have to be attentive. We cannot devalue its presence, but I think it would be a big mistake if we overlooked this party like Chega and forgot who really matters. And for me, who really matters are all those who are still in need of greater social care and who are still believing, in the mainstream parties. They are still believing in the Socialist Party. They are still voting for them. Many of them are still, not just sympathizers, but militants. I think this is really important, not to lose the focus, and I don't see the rise of this party in Portugal as a sort of a symptom that something is going on in terms of the quality of our relationship with otherness. We have our issues with otherness. That's a fact. We cannot say otherwise or differently. But in general terms, we have a positive approach. And I think it's one of the reasons why this party, Chega, is exploring much more the complex, the tense relationship that our population always had with the Gypsy community. Because it's, the way to channel their xenophobic and racist approaches would be compromised if they talked openly against, African communities, immigrant communities, because most people in society are not ready for that. And I hope they will never be. I mean, people would be shocked, like, come on, even because somehow social media have been important for this. People know that, for instance, immigrant communities in Portugal, they are positive in terms of social security. I mean, they're giving more money than the money they are taking out. So it would make little sense. No, come on, to create fractures, to create divisions with the African communities. Why? But regarding the Gypsies, somehow it's a sort of it's very bothersome, but somehow it's okay, so to speak, to criticize this community. They have been Portuguese since 1820, but there is all this long history of cultural tension with the community. most people don't know that this is an oral community, oral-based community. They don't understand why they tend to be so closed, so conservative in their costumes. So it's this, difficult relationship with otherness. When you don't understand the other, you have this suspicious attitude, like with the Jewish over the centuries. So it's kind of easy to make them a scapegoat. And most people will go along with this without even thinking, hey, come on, this is being racist. I mean, because if you look at figures, this idea that they are living on subsidies, again, because it's not okay to say we're against them just because they're different, because we don't like them. Then you have to have some sort of rational explanations. Why are you against these people? Oh, because they live on subsidies. They don't work. They live on drugs, selling drugs and subsidies. But when you look at the statistics, the official statistics, you see it's very residual, those who are living with the support of social subsidies. Okay? And so it's a different case, I think. And for me, as I see it, it's the way that this party has to express its own racist ideology without being too much in the face. And this says a lot, I would say, about the real impact that they may have in the future. So I don't see them as a real big issue. They will be a big issue if we forget our rural world, if we forget our elderly people. They are still relying a lot on the traditional, strong political parties. Then it will be an issue in the future. I hope not.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That was a very wide-ranging interview, to say the least. And even for those political scientists watching, had some interesting suggestions about how to resolve the famous structure-agency dilemma that political scientists talk about. So many thanks for giving me your time, Isabel. You've been listening to Isabel Estrada Carvalhais, who is a Portuguese MEP and a professor of political science and international relations.